The year is 1942. Across occupied Europe, the Luftwaffe rules the skies. The Messerschmitt Bf 109 and the Focke-Wulf 190 slice through clouds like predatory hawks. The Allies are desperate. Every daylight bombing raid ends with B-17s and B-24s being ripped apart before they can even reach their targets. American bombers are flying without escort, and losses are catastrophic. In some missions over Germany, 1 in every 3 bombers never comes home. Commanders in England watch in horror as their formations are chewed to pieces, and pilots whisper a grim truth. We can win this war without control of the sky. Back in the United States, engineers at Republic Aviation are working on something radical. Their lead designer, Alexander Kartveli, is a man who believes in one simple rule. If you want to survive in combat, you need power. The result of that philosophy is the P-47 Thunderbolt, an aircraft unlike anything else in the sky. At first glance, it looks wrong. It's massive, almost twice the size of a Spitfire. It weighs nearly 8 tons fully loaded, more than some twin-engine bombers. German pilots would later joke that the Thunderbolt looked like a milk bottle with wings. But inside that bulky frame sits a monster, the Pratt & Whitney R2800 double Wasp engine, an 18-cylinder radial powerhouse producing over 2,000 horsepower. When it roared to life, the ground shook. Kartveli didn't just want speed, he wanted survivability. So he built the cockpit around an armored bathtub of steel with 1/2 inch of armor plating, self-sealing fuel tanks, and redundant control systems. It wasn't elegant, but it could take a beating that would shred most planes to pieces. When the P-47 first arrived in England in early 1943, the American pilots weren't impressed either. Many had dreamed of sleek, agile fighters like the Spitfire. Instead, they got a beast that felt like flying a refrigerator. It climbed poorly, it drank fuel like a truck, and its controls were heavy. Even worse, early models had trouble above 25,000 feet, and radio issues plagued long-range missions. The Germans noticed too. Recon photos and early skirmishes led Luftwaffe pilots to dismiss the new American fighter entirely. One German ace, Oberleutnant Karl-Heinz Weber, reportedly said after his first encounter, "It looks like a bomber that got lost." The Luftwaffe believed the Thunderbolt would be easy prey for their nimble Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs. They were about to learn a painful lesson. Spring 1943. The P-47 finally enters combat with the 56th Fighter Group, known as Zemke's Wolf Pack, led by Colonel Hubert Hub Zemke, a man with nerves of steel and a reputation for turning underdogs into legends. Zemke understood what the Thunderbolt was and what it wasn't. It couldn't turn like a Spitfire, but it could dive faster than anything in the sky. So he told his men, "Never dogfight a German on his terms. Use your speed, hit hard, and climb away." That became the P-47's mantra. Boom and zoom. The first engagements over northern France were cautious, but then came the mission over Rouen, where the Wolfpack tangled with a formation of FW-190s. The Germans pounced, confident as ever, but the Thunderbolts didn't play by the usual rules. They stayed high, then dove at breakneck speed, unleashing streams of tracer fire from 850 caliber Browning machine guns, 425 rounds per gun. The sky lit up. One German fighter exploded mid-air, another spun down trailing smoke. The Luftwaffe pilots had never seen firepower like that before. Word began to spread through Allied airfields. The Jug can fight. That nickname, Jug, came from its jug-like shape, but soon it became a badge of honor. The P-47 wasn't graceful. It was brutal. Its 50 caliber guns could tear wings off enemy aircraft in a single burst. Its armor could take direct hits from cannon shells and keep flying. Pilots who once mocked it now refused to fly anything else. Major Robert S. Johnson of the 56th Fighter Group became one of its first heroes. In one legendary fight, Johnson's Thunderbolt was hit over 100 times by 20mm cannon shells. His canopy was jammed, his controls barely worked, yet he made it back to base alive. When he climbed out, a mechanic reportedly said, "Sir, you brought back a flying colander." That day, even the skeptics believed. The P-47 had earned its place, and the Luftwaffe had a new nightmare. By mid-1943, the Thunderbolt was just getting started. American factories were producing them by the thousands, each one more powerful than the last. And with drop tanks, they could finally escort bombers deeper into German territory. The Luftwaffe still believed they ruled the air, but a storm was coming. A storm of 8 blazing machine guns, a storm that would turn the sky into fire. By the summer of 1943, Europe's skies were a battlefield no man could control. Day after day, Allied bombers thundered toward the heart of Nazi Germany. Their mission: destroy the industrial backbone of Hitler's war machine, the factories, rail yards, and oil refineries that kept the Wehrmacht alive. But without proper fighter escort, they were easy prey. The Luftwaffe's Bf-109s and Fw-190s struck with ruthless precision, turning slow-moving bombers into flaming wrecks. On average, 60 to 80 bombers were lost in a single deep penetration raid. Crews called these missions flying coffins to Schweinfurt. The U.S. 8th Air Force needed a guardian, something that could survive in the chaos and bring the fight to the enemy. Enter the Republic P-47 Thunderbolt, the most misunderstood fighter ever to take flight. At bases across southern England, Boxted, Halesworth, and Halesworth, rows of shiny new Thunderbolts sat gleaming in the morning fog. Pilots, many just out of training school, approached these monsters with mixed feelings. They were massive, loud, and intimidating. When the R-2800 double Wasp engine came alive, it shook the ground like a living thing. Major Hub Zemke of the 56th Fighter Group gathered his new men in a briefing hut, cigarette smoke curling in the air. He pointed to a chalkboard drawing of the Thunderbolt and said, "Gentlemen, this isn't a Spitfire. You can't dance with a German in this bird. You hit him once and leave him wondering what just happened." Zemke trained his pilots to use the Thunderbolt's greatest strengths: speed, altitude, and firepower. They learned to climb high above enemy formations, roll into steep dives, fire short, devastating bursts, and then zoom away before the Luftwaffe could counterattack. It was a new style of combat, cold, fast, and lethal. And it was about to be tested in blood. April 1943. The first combat mission for the Thunderbolt. The target: German positions near Rouen, France. Zemke's Wolf Pack escorted a formation of B-17s, still uneasy with their new mounts. The mission started quietly, until radar picked up a cluster of enemy aircraft approaching fast. "Bandits at 2 o'clock high," crackled the radio. 20 Focke-Wulf 190s dived in from above, cannons blazing. The sky exploded with tracer fire. Zemke barked over the radio, "Use your altitude! Dive and hit 'em hard!" The Thunderbolts roared downward, engines screaming, airspeed needles pushing past 500 miles per hour. German pilots tried to follow, but their planes began to shudder and lose control. The Jug could dive faster than anything else in the sky. At 300 yards, the P-47s opened fire, 8 Browning 50 caliber machine guns, each spitting out lead at 13 rounds per second. The air turned into a storm of tracers. 2 German fighters burst into flames instantly, their wings torn apart. The surviving Luftwaffe pilots broke off in disbelief. For the first time, the hunters had become the hunted. Despite that early success, the Thunderbolt's climb to fame wasn't easy. It was still too short-ranged to escort bombers deep into Germany. Many missions ended with P-47s turning back at the border, leaving bombers to fend for themselves. Engineers rushed to fix the issue, introducing drop tanks, external fuel tanks that could be jettisoned mid-flight. With them, Thunderbolts could finally reach the Ruhr Valley, and later, Berlin itself. But range wasn't the only challenge. Early Thunderbolts suffered from turbo-supercharger issues, electrical malfunctions, and even canopy frosting at high altitudes. Mechanics worked around the clock, often in freezing rain, to keep them flying. The pilots, meanwhile, kept refining tactics, developing formation attacks, finger four groupings, and radio call procedures that would later become the standard for modern air combat. Every mission taught them something new. Every dogfight made them deadlier. The Luftwaffe, however, still believed the P-47 was a fluke, a clumsy American brute. They hadn't yet seen what the Thunderbolt could really do. By mid-1943, the Thunderbolt had found its rhythm. A single burst from its 8 50-caliber guns could shred a German fighter, or rip apart a locomotive, a convoy truck, or a train yard below. Soon, Zemke's Wolfpack began using the P-47, not just for air superiority, but for fighter-bomber missions. They'd dive from 10,000 feet, machine guns blazing, and devastate German supply lines. One Luftwaffe mechanic later recalled, "We feared the jugs more than the bombers. The bombers dropped from high altitude. The jugs came for you personally." German ground troops began calling them the Butchers of the Sky. Even seasoned Luftwaffe aces like Johannes Steinhoff admitted, "The Americans have built something we underestimated." But the true shock would come when the P-47s finally faced Germany's elite, the Jagdgeschwader units, led by men like Adolf Galland, the legendary ace of aces. The Luftwaffe thought it would be another easy victory. They were wrong. By autumn 1943, Thunderbolts were everywhere, France, Belgium, and soon the skies above Germany itself. The Luftwaffe command, confident as ever, issued a chilling order: crush the American intruders before they reach our homeland. What followed was one of the fiercest aerial duels of the war, a showdown that would prove once and for all whether brute force could stand against German precision, and when the smoke cleared, the laughter would stop forever. Next, the Thunderbolt meets the Luftwaffe's best head-on, and the sky becomes a furnace. Autumn 1943. The skies above Germany turned into a killing ground. For months, American bombers had hammered the industrial heart of the Third Reich, the Ruhr Valley, the beating heart of Hitler's steel and coal production. Now, for the first time, they weren't alone. Flying high above the bomber streams like armored hawks were the P-47 Thunderbolts. Their mission was simple: keep the Luftwaffe away. But what waited for them was a nightmare. As the bomber formation neared Bremen, German radar picked them up. Sirens wailed across airfields from Münster to Hanover. Dozens of Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs scrambled into the cold October sky. The Luftwaffe was coming. The radio erupted in static and tension. Bandits inbound, 200 plus. All groups tighten up, protect the heavies. The American formation braced for impact. Moments later, the contrails merged, and the sky exploded. German ace Major Egon Mayer, with over 60 victories to his name, led a formation of FW-190s straight into the bomber column. They were veterans, killers trained in the deadly art of frontal attacks, the head-on strikes that could shatter a bomber formation in seconds. But this time, something was different. As Mayer's group dove in, the P-47 swooped down like thunderbolts, literally. 8 guns per aircraft, that's 6,800 rounds per minute of 50-caliber fury, tore through the sky. One burst struck Mayer's wingman. His Focke-Wulf disintegrated mid-air. Another was shredded so violently that wreckage rained down for miles. The German attack broke apart instantly. The Thunderbolts had just proven they weren't the slow, clumsy milk bottles the Luftwaffe thought they were. One German pilot, Lieutenant Hans Dortenmann, later admitted in his diary, "The big American fighters, they come from above like falling mountains. You cannot outdive them. They're bullets. It's like flying through a storm of hammers." At German airfields, the laughter stopped. Reports flooded Luftwaffe command. The new American fighter could dive faster, climb higher, and survive hits that would down any Bf-109. Their engines overheated trying to chase it. Their cannons jammed under the pressure of high-speed dives. And when they pulled back, the Thunderbolt pilots turned and came again, relentless. Each pass unleashed 8 streams of lead, each bullet the size of a man's thumb, tearing through wings, engines, and cockpits. "You didn't dodge a Thunderbolt," one Luftwaffe mechanic said. "You survived it, or you didn't." By late 1943, the once-feared Luftwaffe began to lose confidence. German pilots started calling the P-47 the monster, because it just wouldn't die. But nothing cemented the P-47's reputation more than one incredible story: the near-miraculous survival of Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson of the 56th Fighter Group. June 26, 1943, a routine escort mission turned into hell. Johnson's P-47 was ambushed by a swarm of Focke-Wulf 190s. Cannon shells ripped through his fuselage. Hydraulic fluid poured into his cockpit. His canopy was jammed shut, his elevator damaged. Smoke filled the cockpit, but the jug kept flying. As Johnson limped toward England, one FW-190 returned, flown by a German ace. He pulled alongside, saw the American plane riddled with holes, and decided to finish the job. The German lined up and opened fire, 20-meter rounds striking Johnson's tail, wings, and fuselage. But somehow, the P-47 refused to die. Johnson, trapped inside his bullet-riddled cockpit, could only watch. The German ace fired again and again, expending his entire ammunition belt. When the Thunderbolt still didn't go down, the German pilot pulled alongside, saluted, and flew away. Johnson somehow made it home. Mechanics counted 21 cannon hits and over 200 bullet holes. The only part of the plane that hadn't been touched was the engine. "The jug brought me home," Johnson said later. "Any other plane would have been a coffin." When the story spread, even the Luftwaffe couldn't believe it. Up to this point, Thunderbolts had mostly played defense, protecting bombers, fending off enemy fighters. But by early 1944, everything changed. With the arrival of longer-range drop tanks and better coordination, Zemke's Wolfpack was unleashed on offensive missions deep inside occupied Europe. Their orders were simple: seek, engage, and destroy anything that moves. The P-47 became more than just an escort fighter. It became a weapon of total disruption. Rail lines, convoys, bridges, fuel depots, nothing was safe. In a single month, the 56th Fighter Group destroyed over 1,000 German locomotives. One pilot, Captain Francis Gaby Gabreski, became the top American ace in the European theater with 28 kills, nearly all in the Thunderbolt. He once said, "When those 850s opened up, the whole world seemed to stop moving." By the time 1944 dawned, something unthinkable had happened. The Luftwaffe, once the terror of Europe, was now fighting for survival. The P-47 was everywhere, escorting bombers, strafing ground targets, or patrolling the skies over Normandy. Its thunderous roar became the sound of doom to German troops below. Even Adolf Galland, the Luftwaffe's own general of fighters, admitted grimly, "We have lost control of the air. The Americans have built a flying fortress that can fight as well as protect." For the first time in the war, the balance of power had shifted, and it was shifting fast. But the Thunderbolt's true fury was yet to be unleashed. When D-Day came, it would rain fire like the world had never seen before. By early 1944, the war in the air had changed, and so had the P-47. What began as a bulky high-altitude escort fighter was now a multi-role weapon of destruction. The engineers at Republic Aviation had pushed the machine to its limits. The new P-47D Thunderbolt had improved visibility, larger drop tanks for extended range, and new bomb racks that could carry up to 2,500 pounds of explosives. The same 850 caliber machine guns that shredded German fighters now tore through ground targets like they were paper. Each mission was now a deadly symphony of sound and fire. The roar of the radial engine, the scream of the dive, and the staccato fury of 8 heavy guns hammering from the wings. To the Germans below, that sound meant only one thing: death was coming from the sky. Before the Allies could invade France, they needed control of the skies. That mission fell to the 8th Air Force, and its sharpest weapon, the Thunderbolt. Their campaign was called Operation Point Blank, the systematic destruction of the Luftwaffe. Factories, fuel depots, airfields, every critical node of German air power was fair game. And the Thunderbolts led the way. Day after day, they tore across northern France and western Germany, strafing hangars, burning parked aircraft, and chasing fleeing trucks down roads. Their dominance grew so overwhelming that by mid-1944, the Luftwaffe was losing over 400 planes a week. The Germans simply couldn't replace them fast enough. General Karl Spaatz later said. We didn't just win air superiority, we erased the Luftwaffe from the map. But the cost was heavy. American losses mounted too. Flak, mechanical failure, and fuel shortages claimed hundreds of Thunderbolts. Yet morale stayed high. The pilots knew every sortie brought the Allies one step closer to the invasion. And in the pubs of England, a new saying was born. If you want to get home, fly the jug. Sound cue. Ocean waves, wind, faint engines in the distance. Then the roar of 1,000 aircraft overhead. June 6, 1944. The largest amphibious invasion in history was underway, Operation Overlord. And above it all, thousands of Thunderbolts filled the sky. From dawn until dusk, they pounded German defenses across Normandy, cutting off reinforcements, destroying rail lines, blasting artillery positions, and strafing anything that dared move. They flew 500 missions that day alone. One pilot recalled, "The beaches were covered in smoke, ships, and chaos. But up there, we owned the air." While Allied soldiers clawed their way up Omaha and Utah beaches, P-47s swooped in low, unleashing their wrath on German tanks and machine gun nests. One German infantryman later wrote in a letter found after the war, "We feared no man, but we feared that sound, the scream of the Thunderbolt." Just days after the invasion, near the French town of Villers-Bocage, a column of German Panther tanks tried to push toward the beaches. Hidden among the hedgerows, they felt confident. Their armor could shrug off almost anything. But then came the P-47s. Diving out of the clouds, the Thunderbolts unleashed rockets and bombs with surgical precision. The explosions tore open the road. One Panther took a direct hit from a 500-pound bomb and erupted in flames. Another was flipped onto its side by the blast wave. Within minutes, the armored column was nothing but wreckage. From that day on, the Germans gave the Thunderbolt a new nickname, der Fleischwolf, the meat grinder. Even their elite tank crews began to fear the sound of an approaching P-47 more than any Allied artillery barrage. By late 1944, the Luftwaffe faced its deadliest enemy, not just the Thunderbolt's guns, but starvation. The Thunderbolts had decimated the oil refineries at Ploiești and Merseburg, cutting off Germany's fuel lifeline. Without aviation fuel, German fighters sat useless on the tarmac. Even the famed Messerschmitt Me-262 jet fighters, which could outrun the P-47, were grounded more often than not, because there was no kerosene to fly them. General Adolf Galland later admitted in defeat, "Our greatest enemy was not the American pilot, it was his factory." And that factory was producing P-47s faster than the Germans could shoot them down. Republic Aviation built over 15,000 Thunderbolts by the war's end, each one a flying fortress of steel and fire. In the final months of the war, the P-47's role shifted yet again, from fighter escort to close air support. It became the hammer of the Allied ground forces. At the Battle of the Bulge, when German armor broke through the Ardennes in December 1944, the weather grounded Allied planes for days. But when the clouds finally lifted, the Thunderbolts struck back. "It was like the wrath of God," said one American infantryman. In just 48 hours, they destroyed hundreds of tanks, trucks, and supply convoys, crushing the German advance. General Patton himself famously said, "The P-47 saved our asses more than once. God bless the jug." By spring 1945, as Allied troops pushed into the heart of Germany, the once feared Luftwaffe was gone. Airfields lay in ruins, cities were ash, and the roar of the P-47 echoed over the shattered remains of the Reich. The same plane that the Germans had once mocked as slow and clumsy now ruled their skies without challenge. The jug, one American pilot later said, wasn't pretty, but neither is victory. The Thunderbolt had become the symbol of Allied air dominance, a reminder that sometimes power and perseverance matter more than elegance. By late 1944, the P-47 Thunderbolt had evolved from a workhorse into a predator. The skies over Germany were a deadly chessboard, filled with contrails, tracer fire, and the smell of burning fuel. German pilots had once laughed at the Thunderbolt's massive frame. Now they whispered about it with dread. As the Allies intensified their bombing campaign, P-47s took on a brutal new mission: fighter sweeps deep into enemy territory. Their orders were simple: destroy anything that moved. Trains, trucks, factories, locomotives, bridges, all were fair game. From 10,000 feet, Thunderbolts dove with terrifying precision, unleashing streams of .50 caliber fire. Each burst of the 8 Browning machine guns spat out over 100 rounds per second, tearing metal, wood, and flesh apart. It looked like the earth itself was exploding, recalled Lieutenant Robert Johnson, one of the top-scoring P-47 aces. Nothing survived under our guns. In a desperate bid to stop the relentless American advance, Hitler ordered one final gamble: Operation Bodenplatte. On January 1, 1945, hundreds of German fighters launched a surprise attack on Allied airfields across Western Europe. Their goal: cripple the Allied air forces before they could strike again. But it didn't go as planned. As the smoke cleared, the Luftwaffe had lost over 200 aircraft, and more crucially, many of its most experienced pilots. For every Thunderbolt destroyed on the ground, 5 German planes were shot down trying to escape. The P-47 squadrons bounced back almost instantly. The US factories simply rolled out replacements within days. Meanwhile, the Germans were forced to pull teenage boys from flight schools to fill their dwindling ranks. "We were running out of pilots, out of planes, and out of hope," admitted Luftwaffe ace Johannes Steinhoff after the war. Perhaps the most iconic matchup of the European Air War was between the P-47 Thunderbolt and the Focke-Wulf FW-190. The FW-190 was agile, nimble, and deadly in a dogfight. The P-47 was heavy, blunt, and built like a tank, but in the hands of skilled American pilots, the Jug turned its disadvantages into lethal strengths. P-47s would dive from high altitude using their weight and the power of the 2,000 horsepower Pratt & Whitney engine to reach blistering speeds, sometimes over 500 Mach. German pilots tried to follow, but their aircraft couldn't match the Thunderbolt's diving speed. One Luftwaffe pilot described the feeling as helplessness. "You would see the big silver plane dive away, glowing in the sun. You'd follow, and your wings would begin to tear. That's when the P-47s would pull up, loop around, and return from above, guns blazing." Every encounter proved the same grim truth. The Thunderbolt might not win a turning fight, but it didn't need to. It was built to kill, not dance. Summer 1944. As the Allies broke out of Normandy and surged into France, the Thunderbolt became the spearhead of the ground war. Operation Cobra, General Omar Bradley's massive offensive, relied heavily on air power. Hundreds of P-47s took to the skies to smash German defenses ahead of the infantry. They attacked columns of retreating vehicles, convoys, and troop concentrations. The devastation was unimaginable. German soldiers described entire roads turned into rivers of fire and twisted steel. One Wehrmacht officer wrote, "We no longer feared the tanks, we feared the Thunderbolts." It was a chilling admission, a sign that air dominance had broken the very spirit of the German army. While the Thunderbolt had become a terror on the ground, its original mission, escorting bombers, still played a crucial role. Before the long-range P-51 Mustang entered the skies in force, the P-47 was the only thing standing between thousands of American bomber crews and certain death. Inside those B-17s and B-24s, young men flew missions deep into the heart of Germany, missions that often claimed half their squadron before they could return. But when they saw the silver wings of P-47s overhead, they knew they had a fighting chance. "The Jug was our guardian angel," said one B-17 pilot. "You could always tell it was a P-47 by its sound. Deep, steady, reassuring." The Thunderbolt's sheer durability meant it could take hits that would shred lighter aircraft. There are confirmed reports of P-47s returning to base with cylinders blown off, holes the size of dinner plates in their wings, even tails half missing, and still landing safely. The bomber crews called them the flying tanks, and the Germans, once so proud of their Luftwaffe, could only watch as their fighters were picked off one by one. By early 1945, As the Allies pushed into the Rhineland, the air war had become one-sided slaughter. Thunderbolts patrolled from dawn to dusk. Wherever they went, columns of black smoke rose from the ground. Every rail yard, every convoy, every bridge was reduced to rubble. Even seasoned German pilots, men who had fought since 1939, began refusing to fly. The myth of Nazi air superiority was gone, replaced by something darker, despair. The sky, one captured Luftwaffe pilot confessed, no longer belonged to us. That confession said it all. The hunters had become the hunted. And the P-47, once mocked as too fat, too slow, too heavy, had become the angel of vengeance over Germany's collapsing empire. As the Allied armies crossed the Rhine in March 1945, the Thunderbolt followed, low, fast, merciless. Every day, thousands of sorties crippled what remained of Germany's war machine. From the Ruhr to Berlin, the Jug's roar echoed like thunder, announcing the end of an era. The skies that once belonged to the Luftwaffe now belonged to the Jug. The war in Europe was nearing its end, and the P-47 had helped make that possible. But even as peace approached, few could forget how a plane once ridiculed by the enemy had changed the course of the air war forever. April 1945. Germany was collapsing. The once mighty Luftwaffe, gone. The skies above Berlin now belonged entirely to the Allies. The Thunderbolt roared above the burning cities, patrolling a sky it had conquered through sheer will and steel. No Messerschmitts, no Focke-Wulfs, no aces left to challenge it. In just 3 years, the P-47 had gone from being laughed at by German pilots to becoming the symbol of Allied dominance in the air. Even General Adolf Galland, one of Germany's most respected aces, later admitted, "The Thunderbolt was not beautiful, but it was the most effective fighter of its kind. We feared it." The men who had once mocked it as a clumsy brute now watched helplessly as those same brutes burned their supply lines, crushed their divisions, and silenced their airfields forever. When the war ended in May 1945, most aircraft were quickly retired, scrapped, or forgotten. But the P-47 was just getting started. Its toughness, reliability, and unmatched firepower made it indispensable in the years after the war. In the late 1940s, hundreds of Thunderbolts were sent overseas, to France, Brazil, Mexico, and even Yugoslavia, as symbols of American air power. And when the Korean War broke out in 1950, many thought the P-47's time had passed. But its successor, the F-84 Thunderjet, designed by the same company, Republic Aviation, carried on its legacy. The DNA of the Jug lived on in every jet that came after it. For those who flew the P-47, it wasn't just a machine, it was a lifeline. "She could take more punishment than any of us," said Lieutenant Francis Gabreski, the top P-47 ace with 28 confirmed kills. "You could bring her home full of holes, leaking oil, and she'd still land like she wanted you to live." Another pilot, Robert S. Johnson, survived being hit 21 times in one mission, his canopy jammed shut, his plane riddled with bullets, and still made it back to England. When he climbed out of the cockpit, mechanics counted over 500 holes in his plane. He simply said, "I told you, she's tougher than she looks." That kind of story spread like wildfire. The Thunderbolt wasn't glamorous, but it was dependable. It didn't dance. It fought. And that, more than anything, made it a legend. The Germans had their sleek Messerschmitts and Focke-Wulfs. The British had the elegant Spitfire. The Japanese had the nimble Zero. But the Americans had the Jug, a brawler in the sky. It didn't win because it was graceful. It won because it was relentless. It could dive faster than any other fighter of its time. It could carry more firepower than a small bomber. And it could take hits that would tear lesser planes apart. In the end, the P-47 Thunderbolt didn't just protect the bombers, it reshaped the air war itself. By war's end, P-47 pilots had destroyed over 7,000 enemy aircraft in the air and over 160,000 targets on the ground. That's not just victory, that's dominance. Here's something most people don't know. When the first American jet fighters were introduced after the war, like the P-80 Shooting Star, many veteran pilots still preferred the Thunderbolt. Why? Because the new jets couldn't take damage like the Jug could. One pilot put it perfectly. A jet was fast, sure, but the Jug forgave your mistakes. It kept you alive. Even as the world moved into the jet age, the spirit of the Thunderbolt, its strength, its endurance, its unstoppable will, continued to define American air power. Every modern close air support aircraft, from the Vietnam-era A-1 Sky Raider to the A-10 Thunderbolt II, carries a piece of that legacy. And yes, the A-10's name, Thunderbolt II, was chosen for a reason. Because the U.S. Air Force never forgot what the original Jug accomplished. The story of the P-47 Thunderbolt isn't just about machines. It's about men, and the will to adapt, endure, and overcome. The Germans mocked it. The Americans doubted it. But the sky itself proved them wrong. The Jug was a reminder that sometimes the most underestimated warrior becomes the most feared. Its roar echoed from Normandy to Berlin, from the clouds of France to the forests of Germany. And long after the smoke cleared, it left behind one undeniable truth, that courage and firepower, when forged together, can change the course of history. Music transitions to a slow, heroic score. The P-47 Thunderbolt, the fighter the Germans laughed at, but never again forgot. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more untold tales of World War II, from the weapons that changed the war to the heroes who flew them, then hit that subscribe button, give this video a like, and ring the bell icon so you never miss an episode. Because here on WW2 Valor Echoes, we bring history's fire back to life, one story at a time.